When I was younger, I tried 1,000 different ways to practice. I mean, over my career, I've gone through so many different practice phases. I can't even remember them all. But I can tell you that I saw the biggest swing in my development and my growth on basically two ends of the spectrum. I want to mainly discuss how one of the first ones, which is the one I really thought was the way to go, ended up slowing me down and bogging me down. And when I started focusing on it a different way and then found out lots of people practiced more that way, it was way easier. I got a lot more done. I made a lot more steady and healthy growth. So let's talk about the first way. The first way, I'm a very pencil and paper kind of guy. I like to buy a notebook and start charting everything out. So I had it in my head that when I was really going to try to make these real big, jumps in my playing, that I needed to map out this whole intense, detailed practice routine. And so I would look at my schedule. So I've got 4 hours on Monday, and I can squeeze in 5.5 hours on Tuesday if I get up at 6:45 and whatever. So I mapped out this whole thing, and then I would take my little block of time on Monday, and I would say, okay, I'm going to spend 45 minutes warming up. And then I'm going to spend an hour and a half doing just left-hand exercises. Then I'm going to spend 30 minutes working on my mambo. And then I'm going to spend another hour and a half working on my left foot clave. And on it goes. I would map out this whole thing. And I can still remember the feeling when I was mapping all that out. You get excited. There's all the endorphins kick in, and you feel like this is the moment. And this is finally when everything is going to start turning around. And you're going to make these huge jumps, and everybody's going to just have their minds blown when they hear you in a couple of months. And I realized long after the fact that this was basically all predicated on what I call the Rocky syndrome. And that's what happens in the movie Rocky, where he's got this big match coming up and he decides all right, I'm going to train hard. And so he starts downing a bunch of raw eggs, and he's in this gray sweatsuit, and he looks he doesn't look like Eminem from 8 Miles the Other Way Around, but so he's got this this gray sweatsuit on, and he's running, and it's dark and damp and cold, and he must be miserable, and he's going up these steps, and he's in a lot of pain, and he's beating up slabs of frozen beef. And somehow it's that struggle that he goes through over a couple of months of time that finally that's what makes him ready for the match. And I'm not saying that doesn't work, but I do think there's a lot of myth to that at least I felt. I call that Rocky practicing, thinking all right, I'm going to do all of this stuff, and I'm going to do my version of beating up some frozen beef. So I would do all of this, and I would get off to a great start, but it wouldn't be long before somehow in that process I would either get discouraged, or I would lose focus, or I would get sick and then have to take a couple of days off, or I would get some gig that would take me out of town. It would throw off my schedule and blah, 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 blah. Most of the time I did that, I either saw little results, or I just eventually just gave up because it was just too much to do. On the flip side of that, I made so much more progress when I picked only one or two or maybe three things that I really wanted to get better at, and I obsessed about them. For example, let's take the single stroke roll. For a long time, particularly early on, I had awful singles. I started as a trumpet player. So in high school, while everybody's chopping out in marching band, I was playing trumpet in the jazz band. So I missed all of that stuff. I had to build all that stuff up. So I had pocket, I had feel, but I had terrible single stroke rolls. So I finally decided, all right, I'm just going to start working on them. So every gig I did, I tried to squeeze in some single stroke roll stuff. And every time I was in the practice room, I was practicing something for single stroke rolls. It might be a particular exercise that a friend of mine or a teacher gave me, or I might work out of master studies or stick control. But I would never do that I would only do that for as long as I felt inspired and like I was making progress. The minute I didn't feel that, I would switch and make up my own exercise. I mean, hell, that's on my site. I've got tons of exercises, and the reason I have so many is because I'm the one who invented them, because I was getting bored and also getting a stiff neck doing that in the practice room for hours and hours looking at some book. And on every gig I did, I was using it. Every time I would be in the middle of sitting on the subway, and I'm doing some sort of little pattern, even if I just invented it off the top of my head. I did that for months and months and months. And after a while, I had single strokes, right? So it wasn't some like grueling process. And it was always on my mind. Any chance I got, I was trying to listen to guys who played like Dennis Chambers and, Gary Novak and all these guys who had like blazing singles. I was trying to get it in my ear. I was just obsessed with it. When I became obsessed with brushes, every gig I played way more brushes than I probably should have. And every time I sat down in the practice room, I'd play anything. But I was doing it with brushes. I was listening to brushes. It became an obsession. When I got into Elvin, man, that is almost literally, unless I had a gig to prepare for, all I listened to. I didn't have some like crazy thing where I was like, I'm gonna listen to Elvin for 45 minutes, and I'm gonna practice my Max Roach, and then I'm gonna get onto my Art Blakey, then I'm gonna go more modern and go with Brian Blade. I should also get some odd time in there. Anytime I tried to put those plans together, and I'd be lying if I say that I still don't have those thoughts. Anytime I do that, it would fail. Because the thing is, if you have one or two things you want to work on, you can work on them anywhere and everywhere. I mean, literally anywhere and everywhere. If there's something I'm working on, if there's like some little groove, like when I did all those 52 licks, I had to work them up. And I would just be sitting somewhere at the DMV and I'm doing something to go over that lick. And that process, I think, is much more natural, and it's also you're banging your head against the wall way less. The last tip I'll give you is when you're obsessing about your single stroke roll, when you decide it's finally time to get your slow swing together or whatever it is, right? I think what kicks in the back of most people's mind, it sure enough did for me, is this fear that, what about all the other stuff I have to work on? Like, I'm not good enough to just focus on one thing. I got so much stuff I have to work on. Trust me, if you let those fears go and just focus on the couple of things that you want to work on, that you feel like you need to work on, you will make so much more progress there. And then you can kind of let those go. It's maintenance from time to time, but kind of once you get your singles together, other than some maintenance, you've kind of gotten them together, and then you can move on to something else. As I've said a million times, we get to play drums basically for the rest of our lives, so there's no rush. Just work on what you want to work on. And work on it all the time. 5-minute, 10-minute increments. You'll be amazed at how much more progress you'll make, how much better you'll feel about your drumming, how much more confidence you'll have, how much more fun you'll have in the practice room. I mean, for me, when it was something I was obsessed with, I would completely lose track of time. No longer was I like, all right, I got 25 minutes till I finish this. My neck's hurting. I would just mess around and come up with these little patterns for singles or whatever it is I was working on. And before long, I was late to a gig or something because I was busy. I was like in the zone. I was like focused. I was obsessed about it. Being obsessed about a few things in the practice room, in my opinion, is a much better way to go than the Rocky syndrome, which I am far too guilty of many, many times in my career. Anyway, I hope this helps. I hope this whole series has helped. Get out there and practice, and good luck.